Today on TandTeaching.
There's quite a few big challenges for leading a maths department. You've got, one of the biggest ones is societal attitudes to maths. So that's a huge thing in terms of people out there being quite happy to admit, I'm terrible at maths, I'm bad at maths, I couldn't do maths when I was growing up. Even your senior leaders, the people who might be line managing you, not really understanding what maths is about and thinking it can be work like any other subject. It boils down to three things: the stuff you've got to know, the stuff you've got to be able to do, and the stuff you've got to be able to work through. And I would be setting up opportunities to make sure that I show those three things and that I make sure kids understand those three things.
Welcome to TandTeaching, the educational podcast you can listen to with a cup of tea. I'm Arthur Moore, and with me, as always, it's Mike Harwell. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Arthur. How are you?
Oh, I'm absolutely fantastic, buddy. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm excited for this chat, but I don't think I'm as excited as you are.
I'm so excited, Mike, because we are going to talk maths. Not only that, we are going to talk about leading maths, and not only that, we are talking to the author of Leading Maths, Peter Mattock, who loads of people in the maths world will know about. We're going to be talking about the brilliance of maths. We're going to talk about leading the maths department, but we're also going to be talking about some of the challenges facing us as HODs and what we can learn from Peter about being a HOD for our own subjects. So go away, get the kettle on, get a cup of tea, get your calculators out, because we are talking maths.
Hey there! Are you the go-to person for teaching and learning in your school or college? At the Teacher CPD Academy, we make high-impact professional development easy. You'll have access to our ever-growing library of courses, live webinars, and insights from world-renowned experts. With fresh content every month, there's always something new to support you and your staff's development. Join now to access high-quality professional development that's evidence-informed, engaging, can be used at scale, and above all, will save you time. Come and try the Teacher CPD Academy for free now.
Welcome back to TandTeaching. We are joined by Peter, author of Leading Maths. We're having a maths pod. Mike is excited. Peter, welcome to TandTeaching.
Thank you very much. Great to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Our absolute pleasure, buddy. Just maybe someone's listening to this pod who doesn't know who you are, doesn't know kind of your background. Do you want to give us a quick Peter Mattock story?
Yeah, I'm sure there are plenty of people that don't know who I am, to be fair. Peter Mattock. I've taught maths for coming on to 18 years now, generally in secondary schools, some primary outreach work and things like that, but generally in secondary schools. Took my first head of department role in 2011. Was head of department across a couple of different schools, and since 2021-ish, April 2021, been a senior leader in the 11-16 school who line manages maths. I have a head of maths now, but I line manage the department through there. And along the way, I've done a few bits and pieces. I've written some books, one of which we're going to talk about today. I've done some work with the NCETM and been through their secondary mastery lead training and things like that. They're secondary mastery specialists. Written some articles, done some other bits and pieces. Get around a bit in the maths education community.
Which is the best community that I know of, to be honest. I don't know of a better one. So you've written a book all about leading maths, which is kind of what we're going to talk about today, kind of leading departments and specifically kind of your background as a maths leader. So kind of we'll jump in with a really big question, I think, Peter. Like what is the big challenge of leading specifically a maths department in a secondary school?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's quite a few big challenges for, leading a maths department. You've got, one of the biggest ones is societal attitudes to maths. So that's a huge thing in terms of, people out there being quite happy to admit, I'm terrible at maths, I'm bad at maths, I couldn't do maths when I was growing up. Even your senior leaders, the people who might be line managing you, not really understanding what maths is about and thinking it can be it can work like any other subject, and that that it can be led in the same way that you can lead English or you can lead science or any of those other things. Obviously, you've got pupil attitudes to maths coming in the same vein there. But they're, generally about maths. In terms of actually leading maths, it's supporting your team to sort of get round all of those things and get past those barriers that people throw up to learning maths and to engaging with maths in a way that is actually, fun for them and is going to help them understand what's going on. Engaging with senior leaders about, actually this is what maths needs to look like and be taught like if it's going to be impactful and be successful in schools. That's definitely sort of right up there with the biggest challenges that come on. I mean, then you've got loads of others, accountability pressures, huge in maths with the Progress 8, Attainment 8, and the way that maths counts for that in secondary schools. Obviously, in primary schools, it's one of the 2 subjects that they do the external SATs with. You've got the multiplication checks in year 4 there as well. At post 16, you've got the resit issue for GCSE maths. Ofsted will always want to come and look at maths, so you've got those areas to deal with. Those are big challenges.
So there's one or two.
There's definitely quite a few. Yeah, I mean, it'd be hard to pick a biggest one, but there are lots of them. And in fact, the book talks about a number of those different challenges. There's chapters around all of those different challenges that you're going to face whether you lead maths in primary, secondary, FE, specialist education, all of them.
Mike, you wanted to jump in there?
Yeah, me and you, Arthur, have had this conversation multiple times. And I'll say something to you about maths and you go, yeah, it's not like that in maths. Or like we've talked about, for instance, contextual learning before. And can you contextualize your subject in the real world? And you said to me, no, it's not like that in maths. Can't do that in maths. So I guess my question for you, Peter, is you said one of the challenges is leading maths is different to leading English, leading to science, leading other subjects. What makes maths so different in terms of leading it as a subject and teaching it as a subject?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the biggest differences with maths compared to most other subjects is that it has a very abstract sort of nature in terms of, I mean, if you think about, you ask the question, I ask this question a lot to teachers when I do conferences and things like that. What is 3 as a thing? And it's a squiggle on a page. Ultimately, the symbol for it is a squiggle on a page, and that squiggle has changed over history and over the years. Romans used a different symbol for it. We now have a symbol for it. All that squiggle means is what you understand it to mean and what you've been taught that it means, what you understand it to mean. And it's fundamentally different in that way because, I mean, you're talking about contextualizing, Mike, there, sorry. And I would say, in terms of that, with certain maths, it's very difficult to contextualize. But part of the beauty of maths, for me anyway, is that it exists beyond any of those contexts. 3 is an abstract thing, but also that means 3 is 3 no matter what the situation you find yourself in. And that's what makes it sort of really different, because you've got to really be able to find ways to help kids tune into really abstract ideas, but also makes it really wonderful in that you're saying some.
It's very similar to the response I give, Peter. Just like the reason we find maths difficult is because it's abstract, but the reason it is brilliant is because it's abstract. So it's kind of like joining the bridge between those two things. And like Mike, the example you gave of like conceptualizing a real world example, like we have to like, or I find this, Peter, like I have to bodge the real world example to fit the maths, or I have to bodge the maths to fit the real world example. And then nothing really works. And sometimes I just say to my students, we're doing this because the maths allows us to do this. And that's really difficult for like us all to, even us like people who are trained to do this. It's hard for us to like be able to explain what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of applications to maths the real world, and people like Jeff Wake and what have you at Nottingham University do some great work with the realistic maths education sort of area, and producing materials, producing teaching support for that side of things. But what I'll say to my kids is, we don't actually use maths to do this anymore, really, but it's an example that you can understand, that eventually you can build up to the point where we do actually use maths for this sort of thing. So probability is a prime example. Nobody really does the sort of probability questions that they get asked at GCSE maths in reality. But if you're going to build up to the point where you're able to analyze data about weather patterns to predict future weather events or things like that, you've got to start somewhere. And that's the sort of thing I'll explain to my kids, is actually this is a context when we're doing that sort of thing. This is a context that you can interpret and we can put some maths into so that you can build up to it.
One thing I thought was really interesting in the book, Peter, is you talk about kind of the curriculum of maths and how important that is, because it's so kind of knowledge is built on prior knowledge, even more so than other subjects where I know I have this argument with Amy all the time, Mike, about English and kind of how that happens. But you can kind of, the example as I use is if you took a year 11 English lesson and took it to a year 7 class, like you could make it work. It wouldn't be great, but something would work. Whereas if I took some year 11 stuff to my year 7 classes, we like there's too much of a gap. It's incredibly hard to make that judge. If I just throw cosine rule at them and they haven't even done like socket up, what's going on? So Peter, I'm interested when you're talking about people leading the maths department, like how do they kind of embrace that challenge of the curriculum?
Well, I mean, I think personally that that's a lot of the reasons why people go on to become heads of maths, particularly at secondary level, because they relish that challenge. They want to find that way of making the story of maths at that level sort of coherent and consistent across the 5 years or 7 years, depending on what type of school you're in, that pupils are going to be with you. I think, in terms of embracing that as a challenge, first of all, you've got to have a real depth of understanding of that maths. One of the things I often talk about with people around curriculum is things like, if you've not got certain aspects of similarity before you teach trigonometry, then you're absolutely, you've got to correct that. Kids have got to sort that. And although it's not necessarily completely hierarchical, you've got to understand those things that build on other things. And in fact, I know we're talking about leading maths today, but conceptual maths, the book I wrote prior to this, is actually what that's designed to do, to sort of show that journey through these concepts and how they all link together, and stuff like that. But I think, most people who want to become certainly secondary heads of maths, it's because they feel like actually they've got something to say in that area and that's what they want to try and build with. I know that's what motivated me. When I started at Brockington, it was an 11 to 14 only school at the time, and they were just graduating into 11 to 16. The whole of Leicestershire was sort of changing its model from middle school and upper school to that through the secondary years. And what attracted me to it was, you've got to get us ready for GCSE, and you've got to build a GCSE that our kids are going to be successful with. And that was like, great. So I can actually look at the 5 years complete without any sort of, certainly for the last 2, any of the team having any real prerequisite about what that should look like. And it was such an exciting challenge.
Mike, I'm interested to use like you've worked with as like line manager for a lot of departments. We've spoken like maths being slightly different. I wonder if you noticed that, or if you could just like, there's obvious stuff you can bring, but did you go into the maths departments, be like, well, these people are different. This is a different, what are they talking about here? Which does happen. We all know it happens, Pete.
I think as a non-maths person coming at it in a way of supporting, I think you have to put a lot of faith in any subject. Like I've line managed art and design, for instance. I have no idea about art. I have no idea about the skills they're developing, the process they're going through. But so I think you have to put a lot of faith in terms of the head of department, in terms of how they're structuring their curriculum. And I think your job as a line manager is just to ask critical questions. And I think to challenge. And I think there's a lot of research that would say somebody coming in from the outside who doesn't have that base knowledge will actually ask some questions about why are we doing it like this? What's your reasoning behind that? As opposed to someone who's a subject specialist would come in and say, oh yeah, I get that straight away. So I think that questioning process, I actually found that quite helpful to me, not having a base knowledge in the subject and how the curriculum was structured. And, obviously I had to have that idea that a lot of maths is, you're kind of building up and you're revisiting topics, but you're building on topics every single year. So yeah, that I built my knowledge of it, but I like to think in me asking lots of those questions, it helped the head of maths kind of question why they were doing things at the same time.
Yeah, and I think actually, as for a senior leader, I'm in the same position now, Mike. Obviously, I line manage art and DT and a couple of other subjects. From a head of maths point of view, particularly in a secondary school, a senior leader that's willing to ask those questions but be open to the answers and have faith in the have faith in the head of maths that if they can provide satisfactory answers to those questions, or if it makes them think about, oh, actually, yeah, I need to consider that. I haven't considered that yet, but I'm going to consider it and I'm going to go away and make that happen. I think if you're that line manager for a head of maths, the head of maths is going to love you. The other side of that coin is the SLT that goes, no, we're all going to do this across the school everywhere. We're all going to do this, and you're going to have to adapt to fix that. And that's the more challenging one to sort of deal with, is learning to manage that upwards, because as a middle leader you do have to manage upwards as well as manage downwards always, and you have to lead upwards as well as leading downwards. So yeah, that's the one that's a bit more challenging. And there are things you can do with that. Again, I've talked about some of them in the book, in terms of trying to reach compromise, trying to adapt things that are coming on. It depends on, I guess, what position you're in as well. I mean, one of the situations I talk about is if you're just coming off the set of a bad results, and actually there, you know what, you do have to be a little bit more conciliatory there and say, well, clearly I've got some more thinking to do, I've got some more learning to do around this, and my SLT link is going to help me do that. But yeah, if that's the sort of challenge that you do have to negotiate really, really carefully. But I think you sound like you would have been a great line manager for maths, Mike, and if Arthur would have been lucky to have you if that's the approach you took to it.
That was a pleasure every moment he stepped into my classroom. It was honoured. I used to just sob. Sorry, Mike, I'm getting emotional.
Well, one thing I was going to say, I used to say to a lot of the people I line manage is don't confuse my curiosity for judgment. I'm going to ask you lots of questions. Doesn't mean I'm judging. But one thing I think you can do as a line manager of a department is you can still feed back in terms of what you see in the classrooms without having any base knowledge of content. So, for instance, Arthur will know, like I went and observed a higher level IB maths lesson, and it might as well have been a Latin lesson. I understood nothing of the lesson, but I was still able to feed back to the person I watched in terms of, did they model in a good way? Did they question in a good way? So I still think there's value you can add. But yeah, like I said, I think the decision on what content to be taught when, very much like I had to leave that up to the head of the department and trust their judgment on it.
Yeah, definitely. I'd go along with that. I mean, obviously, being from a maths background, line managing maths, I can see those sorts of things. But when I go in and line manage, say, and go in and observe art lessons or computing lessons or DT lessons, it will be very much kind of, yeah, well, like, this is what I saw, this is what I saw, but I noticed you did this. Why did you do that? And I think that's the thing, because you say, did you question in an effective way? Well, even something like questioning is slightly different in different areas to be the most effective. So for me, it's about asking those questions. And again, as a middle leader, if I've got a senior leader that's coming into me and saying, I noticed that this person was doing this, what do you think about that? Really happy with that. If I have somebody that's coming in and saying, this person's doing this and they should be doing this, and I don't agree with them, well, that's possibly a different challenge that you're going to have to meet. And you've got to try and work with that senior leader then to say, well, there's a reason we actually do this, and it's because of this and stuff like that. And actually, I would expect you to see this. But a good middle leader SLT, line manager relationship should allow for that back and forth. If your SLT link doesn't really allow for that, that's a really difficult one to navigate.
Yeah, I'm interested, Peter. Normally Arthur puts me on the spot on these podcasts, so I like to have the rare opportunity to put him on the spot. And never having worked in a maths department, I'm intrigued, Arthur. In your experience, obviously with no names, references, and what's the best head of maths you've ever had? What do they do that's so special that makes you really enjoy being part of that maths department?
Big question, isn't it? So, like, I can only talk from my kind of background, and the best head of department I had in schools, the best kind of manager I had was I was really struggling to adapt to the higher end curriculum. And Peter, you kind of mentioned this in the book. It was something I was going to bring up of like teaching A-level maths is really hard. Teaching the higher end of A-level maths is really hard. I was teaching IB at the time, and it's really difficult. And I needed a line manager that I could go to and say, I am struggling to teach the content and not be judged as someone who was a rubbish teacher, because they're kind of two separate bits. And so the best line manager I had was able to go like, well, that's fine. Let's solve that problem. Here's how we're going to solve that individual problem. I know your teaching is fine, so we need to focus on the content you are struggling with. Because Peter, I know you mentioned this in the book of like when someone's, I think you say skills aren't good enough or their math skills aren't good enough. I'm wondering how you've dealt that as a head of maths before, where you've noticed maybe someone's maths isn't quite good enough. And I say that as someone who, the early stage of my teaching career, my maths definitely wasn't good enough to be teaching the content in as good a way as I should have.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Arthur, it's like you say, you've got to take that as a very specific thing and not necessarily a reflection on the whole person. The content knowledge may not be there for certain things, and obviously that also means potentially the content pedagogical knowledge isn't there. So it's not just then about how I don't know this maths, I don't know the most effective ways to teach this maths because I don't know I'm not sure on the maths myself. My strategy for that is always around, if where possible, always around development and sort of putting in place a way of upskilling that teacher. It may be through getting them to come and watch me do it or getting them to come and watch somebody else do it. It may be that we bring that sort of thing to department meetings. I really like to do that, actually. One of my sort of central tenets in leading a department was when we're together as a team, we should be talking about maths. We shouldn't be talking about admin and things like that, because we've got a huge number of really skilled, maybe in different ways in different areas, but ultimately all really skilled people around a table that know a lot collectively about teaching maths. Let's utilize that to talk about teaching maths. Let's not utilize that to talk about setting or admin or things like that. So it may be that we bring it to the table and people sort of discuss and share ideas around that. But it's definitely something that, good to be aware of. Great if the person is able to bring it to you. And I think that's part of it in terms of how do you set up your department so that people are actually comfortable enough to come and tell you that, because I've certainly worked in departments or seen departments when I've been out and about doing stuff where people wouldn't be that comfortable because they would take it as being judged badly. So I think if you, as a leader, if you can separate, okay, well, this is a thing that we're going to have to deal with, but it's not a reflection on this person as a teacher as a whole. That's a great thing to be able to do. And then to be able to say, right, well, what's going to work for you to build this up? And having that dialogue, having that conversation. Teachers teachers are intelligent people. They should be, anything that happens like that should be done with them rather than done to them.
I think maths is one of those subjects, and I'm sure there's others like MFL would come to mind of, like, you can't hide if you don't know something in maths. Like, I'm going to A level. If a student asks you something and you cannot do it, there's no like, oh well, what do you think? And then they say, you're like, oh, I don't know. Like, there's no hiding. Whereas maybe in certain other subjects, Mike, you could say like, well, like, let's do something. Like, there's ways I can imagine you can get around. I don't know. Like, just go play football in the field, right? Which, like, the stuff you
Are you
can't
on a
hide.
mission this episode to offend every other subject?
But I mean,
English, PE.
I don't think we've said
any other
anything bad about
subjects?
English, have we? But I mean, we've all had that time, haven't we? No matter what subject we teach, where a kid asks us a question and the mind goes blank, and you're just like, oh, hold on, 1 minute, no. We learn how to deal with that in teaching. I'm actually not sure about that. I'm going to check on that. I'm going to come back to you with that, and then make sure you do follow it up and come back with it. But you get that heart crunching moment where it's like, oh my God, I actually don't know the answer to this question. What's that going to look like? But again, it's one of those things that happens, and it happens to everybody. It happens to most experienced people. So if you're open and honest about it with everybody that you need to be open and honest about, including the kids, then you should be okay.
Peter, I have a question about we're in a recruitment and retention crisis, in particular with maths teachers. You're looking to recruit and you have two options. You've got a teacher with fantastic maths knowledge, but poor delivery, poor pedagogy, and someone who's fantastic in the classroom, but is lacking the maths knowledge. As a head of maths, what would you say is the better of the two evils in terms of what's easier for you to work with the individual to develop, if we assume both individuals are equally motivated?
Mike's on one today.
He is. It's a great question, and it's one that I actually do touch on in the book, because we talk about recruiting to your team and adding to your team. I think there's a danger there, just a little one, in terms of if they may well have good general pedagogy, but there is if they don't have subject content knowledge, then they will also not have some of the subject content pedagogy. But different people will make different decisions on that. My preference was always for option number 2, because subject content knowledge, subject content pedagogy, we can develop. If there's a teacher there who, maybe doesn't have the necessary knowledge to go all the way to A level or stuff like that, or, like I say, when I took over at Brockington, nobody in that department had taught a class of GCSE students for something like 15, 20 years. In some cases, if at all. Some of them have been in 11 to 14 education their entire lives, and that doesn't mean they weren't good maths teachers. It just meant that they didn't necessarily know either the maths to that level or good ways of teaching maths to that level. So we spent the time building that up and spending our time together as a team exploring that. So there are definitely ways around people not having all of the content knowledge that you would want. If they're an absolute shambles in the classroom in terms of generally, that's a bit of a harder fix. I mean, I'm committed to the idea that anybody with enough time and enough training can be a teacher. I'm not one of these people that thinks that teachers are born rather than made. I think it goes against the whole ethos of education to think that you can say to somebody, you are never going to get to the point where you can do this. There are certain people who it would take too much time, too much energy, too much effort to get them there in a reasonable time, and it's not cost effective. And these are the people that ultimately drop out of PGCEs or get pushed out of PGCEs or ITE in other ways. But yeah, long-winded way of saying I would go for number 2, because I'm more confident that we can set things up right to develop their subject knowledge and their subject pedagogy if they're starting from a good general base.
Yeah, and I guess the fallback is if they're not very good at maths teaching, they can just become a tutor, can't they, Arthur? You've got a question, Arthur.
Or a PE teacher, of course.
Or a PE teacher, of course.
Those that can't do teach and those that can't teach PE, right, Mike? No, I'm not saying that at all. That was not at all.
I mean, I can't say that because I also line manage the PE department at my place. So yeah, that I'd be rather unpopular if that came out.
Those that can do teach is what I should say. I'm interested, Pete, if we start to switch it of some kind of things that people are challenges head of departments are facing right now. So when we kind of release the pod, we're going to be super close to kind of GCSE time and revision. That's kind of big on the head of department. Like with all the head of departments you've worked with and yourself a really experienced head of maths, like what's that top tip for really getting those students over that line at kind of GCSE, very math specific? What, like, is there anything you would put on towards the end of that year?
I mean, I've always said to kids, and I would say the same thing to teachers, that when it comes to sort of revising maths and getting right down into the sort of end of their journey with maths, be it at GCSE, be it at A level, it boils down to three things: the stuff you've got to know, the stuff you've got to be able to do, and the stuff you've got to be able to work through. And I would be setting up opportunities to make sure that I show those three things and that I make sure kids understand those three things. So how are you going to deal with the stuff you've got to know? Things like what corresponding angles are, what bearings are, that sort of thing. Before the advent of the formula sheet, what formula do I need to know? Stuff like that. And, you know, there are strategies for that are maths, that are general and as well as math specific. And then the really math specific ones, the stuff you've got to be able to do, things like solve equations, add fractions, we need to be practicing that. There's no better way of getting better. There's no way of getting better at that unless you're actually doing it and getting quite immediate feedback on it. And then there's the stuff you've got to work through. And with that, you need the coaching and guidance of an expert. And actually, in those final few weeks, that's where I spend my time. You know, I tell the kids, you've got to go away and learn this stuff if you don't already know it, or revise this stuff. You've got to practice doing this stuff and practice it from a source that will tell you immediately if you're right or wrong. There's some great websites out there that do that. You know, Corbett Maths has all of that with the model answers there and everything else. Sparks, a lot of the online platforms have that automatically. And then the stuff that we will work on is the stuff where actually you'll need to be guided to how to interpret this type of question, this type of problem. And for maths, you know, it might not be specific just to maths, but it's very particular in maths and maths type subjects that you've got those sorts of three things. And that third one is the one that kids are going to need most teacher guidance on at that point.
And that's a really interesting point. Like, use my expertise where I can make that difference. Don't ask me to check, you know, your square numbers. Like, that's not a good use of any of our time. Kind of, I'm the maths expert. Like, I'm saying in quotations there, listeners. Like, I'm a maths
expert at that level.
Yeah, I'm the maths expert at this moment that you have access to. Like, use me for what I can do to really help you in those moments. And also, Peter, I'm interested. We're have that time of year where there's probably people who are on the verge of applying to be heads of department for next year, or have got that in the bank and they're excited for September. If you're getting ready to be a new head of department for maths in September, what should I be doing? What's my absolute? Peter's told me I must do this.
So I would say there's two things. Number one, learn as much as you can about the current state of play. And I think that would be, you know, something that most people would naturally do. It's really dangerous making changes until you know where the lay of the land is, you know the people, you know the systems, things like that. Certainly changes that take time and are long lasting. And the second thing I would say is look for where there are some quick wins that will, particularly if you're moving schools, so you're going to be leading maths at whatever level, primary, secondary, tertiary, whatever. If you're going to be leading maths in a new school, the best way to get your team on side early is to give them a quick win for something that actually you can change that's very surface potentially, that's not going to have to go too deep, but that's going to make their lives a little bit easier. That will get them on board nice and quickly for things that then you might want to change further down the line that are going to be more difficult and they're going to have to put more work into.
Mike, do you have a go-to walking into a new school as a head department? Here's my quick win.
It's a tough one. I absolutely agree that you've got to know the context. I don't think you can go in and just say from day one, we're going to change this. This is going to instant impact, because I don't think you necessarily understand the context or where the department's been or who's been in charge previously. So I would always start with a SWOT analysis. Get every member of your department to do a SWOT analysis, take it in, read it, meet with them, discuss it, and just understand who's working in your department. Because I think until you understand the people, it's really hard to understand how to fix the problems that maybe you've identified or other people have identified.
Yeah, and that's a big theme in the leading maths book, which isn't actually specific to maths teachers, but maths teachers are often very specific types of people. Is actually, you know, knowing your people, knowing the strengths and weaknesses of your team, things like that, really, really important. And you know, I think the reason Mike's had difficulty saying that quick win is because they are all context specific, every one of them. You might go around the school. Normally you'd visit it if it's a new school, maybe once or twice before taking up the post, and you might see that actually people are breaking their back doing this ineffective marking strategy. So there's a quick win. You can change that. But in other places, they're working on, they're using whole class feedback really effectively. That's not a quick win. You've got to look for those that are context specific, but that are, going to say to the team really early on, I'm here, I'm making life a bit easier for you. Come with me on this journey, because it's going to get like that.
I'm going to quote Mike Harrowell here as something that he said to me when I was getting ready to kind of take on extra responsibility. Like, your role is to support them and your role is to challenge them. It's about support and challenge. So find out where you can support them and find out where you challenge them. If you're doing both those things, everyone's going to get a little better at what they do. And that can only be a good thing. Pete, it's been so interesting talking maths on the pod. We don't do it enough, Mike. Maybe we should become a maths only pod. But Pete, thank you so much for coming on. We've spoke about the book and the books and other stuff. Where do people get the book? What do they do? Where they go find out more about you? Please tell us everything.
Yeah. So my first book was Visible Maths, and that's all about representation and structure. Second book that I mentioned was Conceptual Maths, which is about sort of all of those maths concepts that make up the compulsory maths curriculum. And then obviously the one we've been talking most about here, Leading Maths. All three are published by Crown House Publishing. So you can go to the Crown House website and get, any one of those. They're doing a bundle deal at the minute, actually, right now, where you can get all three of them for £50. Normally, conceptual maths on its own is sort of £35 on its own. So you get basically the other two for another 15 quid, which is quite a steal. There's a bundle offer that's there at Crown House Publishing. You can get them from Amazon and other good bookshops and what have you as well. For me, more generally, so because my first book was called Visible Maths, my website is visiblemaths.co.uk, and on there you can find links to my Twitter if you want to engage with me on Twitter, well, X as it now is. You can find, some of the other websites that I run or help to run for different types of resources. We didn't talk about some of the resources that are there, but things like goal-free problems, which is another thing I'd be using in revision, stuff like that. More, same, less. So all of that is on the website, visiblemaths.co.uk, as well as links to the books, and to be able to get in contact with me anyway. People might want to engage with me.
Awesome. Pete, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Team Teaching. Thank you so much for your time.
No, brilliant. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you both for letting me come along and talk maths and leading maths for a while. What better thing is there to do other than to actually do it?
There is no better way to spend an evening. Listeners, we'll be back in a moment.
Welcome back to TandTeaching. Arthur's had a field day. Can't get enough of talking maths. And apologies if you're non-maths teachers listening to this. Thank you for listening to this if you're a non-maths teacher. Hopefully you picked up some really useful advice. Arthur, what did you pick up that was useful from that conversation, apart from everything?
Just love talking maths. But what I really like, one point Pete made, and this kind of resonated with me kind of throughout my maths journey, is just like when he said, when we're together as a maths department, we talk maths. Like, we're not going to waste this time on admin, all that stuff. Like, we're together as a group of mathematicians. Let's use this time to improve our maths, or improve how we're teaching maths, or improve our curriculum of maths. I really enjoyed that thing. That's something that I really would want my head of department to be thinking. Like, we're together, let's use that time to talk maths because this is our maths department. I've just really enjoyed that point. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I love a conversation you both had about how maths is abstract, and it's wonderful because it's abstract. And it made me think about kind of just embracing your own subject for the quirks that come with your own subject. And what makes your subject unique is the thing that makes you love what you teach. And I just thought that was a really nice point for anyone listening to this who's maybe a non-math specialist.
No, it was really nice just to talk maths, but I think a lot of what we spoke about is just being a really good HOD, and what Pete spoke about, having to manage up as well as down, kind of recruitment, supporting teachers with their content knowledge. Like, that's true for every single subject. So really enjoyed that. So thanks for coming on the pod, Pete. Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure as always.
And to you, Arthur, and thank you for all of you who've listened to this episode.
Thank you for listening to this episode of TandTeaching.
If you've enjoyed the content of this episode, please feel free to share it with other educators.
And if you're able to, please leave a review on the platform.
And as always, thank you for listening to TandTeaching.